My husband won't do anything to me if he finds out that I'm cheating on him, the cheating wife told her friend. But if the cheaters knew what kind of revenge awaits them in the future, they wouldn't be so brave. Greetings, my dear viewer. Having lived 37 years in marriage, you least expect betrayal, because 37 years is a lifetime, and exchanging it for a fleeting infatuation is just a huge stupidity. And so, let's listen and find out what kind of revenge Liam has prepared for cheaters. And while you're watching this video, my friend, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Let's go. Emma, you're walking on thin ice. If Liam finds out what's really going on, everything you've built could come crashing down. Patricia's voice carried a distinct tone of concern as she leaned forward, her face etched with worry. The oppressive silence in the kitchen was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the clock, but the tension between them was palpable. Emma, casually leaning against the countertop with a glass of wine in hand, seemed completely indifferent to Patricia's warning. "Patricia, you need to relax," Emma replied dismissively, as though brushing off the concern. "Liam is too absorbed in his work to notice anything. We barely talk these days." She took another leisurely sip of wine, her eyes radiating a mixture of confidence and detachment. Patricia nervously traced the rim of her coffee mug, her gaze fixed on Emma. Did Emma really understand the gravity of her situation, or was she simply blinded by the thrill of the affair? "I'm not sure, Emma. You think you've got everything under control, but secrets like this often spiral out of control. And Liam, yes, he's patient, but even he has limits." Emma rolled her eyes, her voice cold and emotionless. "You're overthinking it. I have everything under control, trust me." She smiled, as if savoring the excitement of her double life. "Besides," Emma continued, her voice softening when she mentioned her lover, "Daniel is worth the risk. He's nothing like Liam. He's thrilling." Patricia shook her head, her gaze drifting to the dim light filtering through the kitchen window. Over the years, Patricia had watched Emma's marriage slowly deteriorate. Liam wasn't a bad husband. He was reliable, stable, always there, but it was these very traits that Emma had come to resent. The fire in their relationship had long since extinguished, replaced by a routine that left Emma searching for something more. "I understand, Emma. I really do," Patricia said gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "Liam doesn't give you what you need anymore. But this is dangerous. You're playing with fire." Emma let out a soft laugh at the word dangerous. "Liam won't do anything," Emma shrugged. "He's too calm. If he finds out, maybe it'll finally push him to leave. Honestly, I wouldn't mind the freedom from this marriage." Patricia's eyes widened in shock. "Do you even realize what you're saying?" she asked, stunned. "You're talking about ending your marriage, your whole life, as if it means nothing." Emma shrugged again, even more nonchalantly this time. "Maybe it doesn't matter much anymore. I'm tired, Patricia. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine. Being with Daniel is the first time in years that I feel alive." Patricia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with concern. "And what about Daniel? Do you really think this will last? What happens when the excitement fades like it did with Liam?" Emma paused for a moment, considering her response, swirling the wine in her glass before quietly answering, "I don't know. I'll deal with that when it happens." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken fears. Patricia could feel Emma slipping away, consumed by impulsive decisions and reckless desires. A sense of impending disaster weighed heavily on her. "Emma," Patricia said, her voice calm but laden with worry, "just promise me you'll be careful. Liam may seem calm, but everyone has a breaking point. If you push too far, you don't know how he might react." Emma chuckled softly, but this time there was a hint of tension in her laugh. "I'm not afraid of Liam. He won't do anything crazy. If he finds out, sure, he'll be mad, but it'll pass. Liam's not the type to lose control." But as Patricia watched Emma, she couldn't shake the feeling that her friend was dangerously underestimating the fragility of the situation. It seemed like Emma was blind to the storm that was brewing, and Patricia feared that when it finally hit, the consequences would be far more devastating than Emma could ever imagine. Patricia stood up, and her cup made a slight sound as she placed it back on the table. "I just hope you're making the right choice," she remarked, reaching for the jacket that was hanging on the back of the chair. "You need to understand the risks. These kinds of situations rarely end without consequences." Emma, following her to the door, nodded in agreement. "I've thought it all through," she responded with a confident voice. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." As Patricia stepped into the cool evening air, a sudden chill made her pause for a moment. She turned back to Emma, and a look of concern crossed her face. "If you're not careful, everything could fall apart," she warned. Emma's confident expression remained unchanged. "I've got everything under control, Patricia. Just trust me." Watching Patricia disappear around the corner of the street, Emma returned to the kitchen, feeling the warmth of the wine spreading through her body. She set the half-empty glass down on the countertop and picked up her phone. A few taps brought her to Daniel's name, and her heart raced as she saw his familiar profile picture. Her fingers flew across the screen as she typed a message, excitement building inside her. "Thinking about you. Can't wait for tomorrow." Almost immediately, the familiar typing bubble appeared. His response came quickly. "Miss you. Tomorrow can't come soon enough." "Same time, same place?" she asked, a smile spreading across her face. "Of course," he replied. The thrill of their secret meetings filled her with adrenaline, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. But as she leaned against the countertop, the smile faded for a moment. Patricia's warning echoed in her mind. What if Liam ever finds out? She had been so careful. There were no obvious clues, but Liam wasn't easy to deceive. If he suspected anything, he'd stop at nothing to uncover the truth. Shaking off her unease, Emma refused to let it ruin the joy of the moment. As long as she played her part flawlessly, she could keep her two lives from colliding. She poured herself more wine and moved into the living room, sinking into the soft embrace of the couch. The house was eerily quiet, with Liam still tied up in yet another business meeting. She wondered if he had noticed the growing distance between them, or if perhaps he too felt a strange relief from their separation. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel. "I was thinking, what if we went away together for the weekend? Left everything behind for a couple of days." Emma's heart raced at the thought. A weekend away? That would be harder to hide, even more difficult to explain. But the temptation to escape from her crumbling marriage with Daniel for a few days was irresistible. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the phone. Before she could respond, the low hum of the garage door pulled her out of her thoughts. Liam was home. Quickly turning her phone face down on the table, she grabbed the TV remote. By the time he walked into the room, she was casually flipping through the channels, her smile practiced but convincing. "You're early," she said, her tone deliberately light. "Yeah, the meeting ended sooner than expected," he replied, giving her a quick glance before heading into the kitchen. His tone was neutral, but something about his behavior felt different, something that unsettled her. Listening to him move around in the kitchen, her mind began to race. Does he know? Did she make a mistake? Liam sat in his office, the dim light from his laptop illuminating his tired face. It was well past midnight, but sleep was the last thing on his mind. His eyes, red and strained from hours in front of the screen, were fixed on Emma's recent bank transactions. Suspicion gnawed at him, his thoughts spinning in a whirlwind. The restaurant check here, the hotel bill there, all from places Liam had never been. On all those nights, Emma said she was meeting up with friends. As he scrolled through the mounting evidence, he felt the knot in his stomach tighten even further. Each new fact confirmed the fears he had so desperately tried to ignore. His hand hovered over the mouse, fingers slightly trembling as he opened her messages. He had gained access to her accounts without her ever suspecting a thing. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, knowing that once he clicked, there would be no turning back. The messages were all there, long, secret conversations. The contact's name was Linda Michael, an innocent label Emma had chosen on purpose. But Liam knew better. There was no Linda, and these conversations were far from innocent. He clicked on one of the message threads. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Same place?" The reply came almost instantly, playful and eager. "Of course, already missing you." Liam's jaw clenched. A cold lump of fear settled in his chest. His knuckles whitened as his fists tightened. "Daniel," he muttered under his breath, the name burning his tongue like acid. He had seen it before, glimpsed in fragments of deleted messages, and he had already pieced together who Daniel was. Daniel, younger, more confident, a smooth talker working at the neighboring real estate agency. The same Daniel who had been sleeping with Liam's wife while he worked late into the night. Liam leaned back in his chair, staring blankly at the screen, a storm of betrayal and rage raging in his head. He had known for a while that there were problems in their marriage. That had been obvious. But this was a betrayal of an entirely different level. For months, Liam had been trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. Was it his long work hours? Had he really been neglecting her needs? He knew he hadn't been the most attentive husband recently, but Emma's betrayal felt like a knife to the heart, a wound far deeper than any marital issue they could have worked through. Looking back, he realized the signs had always been there. Her sudden obsession with late-night meetups, the increasingly frequent weekend trips with friends, the growing emotional distance between them. That widening gulf between them had become an ocean he could no longer cross. Once, he had gently asked her if everything was okay. She had laughed, kissed him lightly on the cheek, and told him not to worry. But there had been something in her smile, something that had vanished too quickly when she turned away, leaving him with a nagging feeling that he wasn't seeing the full picture. Now, in the dim light of his office, the truth stood in stark, terrifying clarity. Emma had been unfaithful. Liam shot up from his chair and began pacing the room, fists clenched. His calm, restrained demeanor, the one he had always prided himself on, was crumbling before his eyes. He had always been proud of staying cool, no matter how tough the situation. But now, all he wanted to do was explode, break something, confront Emma immediately, and demand answers. His phone buzzed on the desk, snapping him out of his whirlwind of thoughts. It was a message from Emma. "Hey, are you working late again? Just checking in. Love you." Liam stared at the screen, a wave of disgust distorting his face. How could she write a simple "love you" after spending the night with someone else? He put the phone back on the desk, staring at it, paralyzed by the weight of the truth he had just uncovered. What now? Should he confront her? End it all? His future now felt like a labyrinth of uncertainty, but one thing was clear. He couldn't just let this go. His thoughts drifted back to when they had first fallen in love. He remembered how much they had once cared for each other, the joy, the shared dreams they had talked about endlessly. Everything had seemed so right. But somewhere along the way, it had all fallen apart. Liam couldn't pinpoint exactly when everything started to change, but he knew that a growing chasm had formed between them. To distract himself, he threw himself into work, taking on extra hours, convinced that if he worked hard enough, he could still secure the future they once planned together. But while he was focused on their shared dreams, it seemed Emma's attention was elsewhere. With a deep sigh, he turned to his laptop and opened the folder he had meticulously compiled over the past few weeks. It was a collection of photographs, messages, and account statements, evidence of dinners and trips Emma had taken with Daniel, none of which included Liam. For some time now, Liam had suspected something was wrong, but the reality staring back at him from the screen was undeniable. This wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It was an ongoing affair. Daniel's name echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the betrayal he could no longer ignore. Thoughts of Daniel, this outsider who had taken something precious from him, burned in Liam's mind. He pictured Daniel as carefree, perhaps a younger version of himself, someone unburdened by the weight of long-term commitments. Liam could almost hear Daniel laughing, smugly believing he had outwitted him, thinking he had won. "You really think you'll get away with this, don't you?" Liam whispered, his anger simmering just below the surface. His chest tightened, adrenaline surged through his veins, and his muscles tensed at the thought of what he might do next. But his anger wasn't just directed at Daniel. Emma's betrayal was the most painful blow. The thought that she could lead a double life without him noticing hurt the most. Liam had always been perceptive, always one step ahead, whether in business or life. His entire career was built on anticipating others' moves, yet somehow, he had missed this. He scrolled to another photo, Emma and Daniel, smiling at each other across a restaurant table, her hand resting gently on his. The intimacy between them made Liam feel sick. This was what had become of their 37-year marriage. A farce. His eyes drifted to the clock. It was almost 3 a.m. Emma should be fast asleep by now, blissfully unaware that her carefully woven web of lies was starting to unravel. He slowly closed the laptop and leaned back into the silence of the room. He wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was an act of war. And if there was one thing Liam knew how to do, it was win wars. He would wait, let Emma continue her game, patiently biding his time. And when the moment came, he would strike. But tonight, he was content just to watch. He picked up his phone and reread the last message Emma had sent him. With a steady hand, he replied, "Love you too," and set the phone down, a slight, almost imperceptible smile appearing on his lips. Later that evening, Emma returned home. The sound of her keys jingling in the hallway cut through the darkness of the house, where the dim light from the living room was the only source of illumination. She kicked off her shoes, expecting the usual silence, but something was off, as if tension hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. When she entered the room, she saw Liam sitting in the armchair, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. He wasn't watching TV or reading. He was simply staring at his drink, as if the answers to unspoken questions lay there. His face was unreadable, but there was a chill in his gaze that sent a shiver down Emma's spine. "How was your day?" Liam asked, his voice calm but laced with something far more sinister. Emma froze for a moment before regaining her composure. She forced a smile and took a few steps forward, trying to sound casual. "It was fine," she replied, keeping her tone light. "Just a regular day. And yours?" Liam didn't respond immediately. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his whiskey, his eyes never leaving hers. Finally, he placed the glass on the table with a soft thud. "Interesting," he said, his voice low as if carefully choosing every word. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About us. About the choices we've made." Emma's heart skipped a beat. There was something unsettling in his tone, something dangerous lurking beneath the surface. Her pulse quickened, but she refused to let him see her anxiety. "What do you mean, Liam?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Liam leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on her with cold intensity. "Do you think you're clever, Emma?" His words were sharp as a blade, cutting through the tense air. "Do you really think you can keep playing this game without consequences?" Emma felt her chest tighten, panic beginning to rise inside her, but she forced herself to remain composed. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she replied, crossing her arms in a show of defiance. She knew exactly what he was referring to, but she wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. Liam narrowed his eyes, studying her, suspicion etched on his face. Without warning, he stood up, his movements measured and heavy. His footsteps echoed across the wooden floor as he approached, stopping just a few steps away from her. He placed his empty glass on the mantelpiece, letting the silence between them stretch to an unbearable length. "I know everything, Emma. About Daniel. About your lies." His voice, though quiet, struck her like a punch to the gut. Emma felt a lump form in her throat, and for the first time it became difficult to maintain her composure. "Liam," she began, but her voice faltered. He cut her off, his tone turning icy. "You told me to stay away from him, didn't you?" He stepped even closer, his presence overwhelming. "Well, guess what? I didn't listen." Emma's face paled. Her knees felt weak, but she forced herself not to crumble. "Liam, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling with fear, but it was clear he wasn't listening. Liam now stood just inches from her, his eyes burning into her, the tension between them unbearable. "You thought I wouldn't figure it out? Did you really believe you could make a fool out of me?" His voice grew louder, trembling with barely contained anger. "You made a mistake, Emma, and now you're going to pay for it." Emma's mind raced. She had always thought Liam was too absorbed in his work to notice what was happening behind his back. She never imagined he would start digging into her secrets. But now, seeing his cold, furious eyes, she realized how wrong she had been. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. She wasn't sure what she feared more, what he knew, or what he was about to reveal. Liam didn't answer immediately. He turned away from her, walking slowly toward the window to gaze out at the quiet street. When he spoke again, his voice was frighteningly calm. "I want to meet him," he said, as if it were an ordinary request. "Daniel, your little secret." Emma held her breath. "You—" she started, but Liam cut her off again, his face remaining impassive. "Oh, yes," he said in a flat tone. "We had a talk. Let's just say he won't be around anymore." Her heart raced wildly. She took a step forward, her voice shaking with desperation. "What did you do to him, Liam?" A cold, emotionless, sinister smile spread across Liam's face. "I did what needed to be done. He's no longer your problem, Emma." Emma's voice dropped to a whisper, horror growing inside her with every passing second. "You couldn't have—" Her thoughts raced, imagining terrible possibilities. Had Liam hurt him, threatened him, or worse? Liam turned away again, the smile fading from his face. He picked up his glass and poured himself another drink. Slowly swirling the liquid in the glass, he looked thoughtful, his gaze distant. "It doesn't matter anymore," he said in an even, controlled tone. "There's only one thing that matters now." Emma stood frozen, her entire body tense, her heart pounding in her ears as she waited for his next words. Finally, Liam turned to her, his face still calm, but his words were deadly. "The game is over, Emma. You made your choice, and now it's time to pay for it." Emma tried to speak, her lips parted as if about to offer an explanation, a defense or an excuse, but the words never left her tongue. Liam's statement hung in the air, heavy and immutable, like a verdict that couldn't be overturned. "Liam, please, it was a mistake," she finally thought, but she couldn't bring herself to say the words. Liam, slowly and resolutely shaking his head, cut off her attempt. "No more lies, Emma. I've had enough," he said, setting his glass down on the table with a sharp, final sound. "I'm done." The finality of his words hit her harder than she expected, as if the ground beneath her feet had begun to collapse. Emma had always believed she could control the situation, confident that she could turn any scenario to her advantage. But now, standing in front of Liam, his gaze cold and his anger restrained, she realized she had completely lost control. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Without answering, Liam walked past her towards the stairs. Before disappearing from sight, he cast one last glance over his shoulder, his face unreadable. "You'll find out soon," he said, then left, leaving Emma in a silence that grew more suffocating with each passing second. as her world began to crumble. Liam had always been a tactician. In business, his success was built on careful planning. He always knew when to make a move and was constantly one step ahead of his competitors. To him, Daniel wasn't just a man who had been with his wife. He was a problem to be solved, a weakness to be exploited. So Liam waited, biding his time, gathering all the necessary information. For weeks, Liam quietly observed Daniel. He studied his routine, his habits, his vulnerabilities. Daniel was reckless, too confident in his charm and his ability to avoid consequences. He thought he could get away with everything, just like Emma. But Liam was always one step ahead. He always saw through them. One evening, Liam decided the time had come to act. Emma had left earlier, heading to yet another secret meeting, which she had long since stopped trying to convince him was real. Her lies had become lazy, as obvious as they were pointless. Liam watched her leave in silence, knowing exactly where she was going. But today, he didn't care about Emma. Today, his focus was on Daniel. As night fell, Liam quietly left the house. The drive to Daniel's apartment was silent, the hum of the engine like the rhythm of the plan he had replayed in his mind countless times. He parked a block away and walked the rest of the way in silence, blending with the shadows like a hunter stalking his prey. Liam had done his homework. He knew Daniel's routine and knew he would be home soon. Positioning himself near the entrance to the building, hidden behind a row of parked cars, Liam waited, his pulse steady, his thoughts laser-focused. This was no longer about anger. This was about precision. Revenge, after all, was best delivered without emotion. The quiet evening was broken by the low rumble of an approaching car. Liam tensed, but remained hidden as the vehicle parked nearby. The driver's door opened, and Daniel stepped out, his relaxed demeanor instantly irritating Liam. Daniel suspected nothing, his movements slow and casual as he fumbled for his keys. "You must be Daniel!" Liam's voice rang out, cold and disturbingly calm. Daniel froze, his hand suspended near the lock. Slowly, he turned towards the voice, his face reflecting a mix of confusion and annoyance as he tried to make out the figure standing in the shadows. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded sharply, his brows furrowing in bewilderment. Liam stepped forward, meeting Daniel's gaze. "I'm Emma's husband." The words were simple, but the impact was devastating. Daniel's face paled as the realization hit him. He stood there, stunned, his mouth slightly open, but no words came. Tension hung in the air like a thick fog, choking off any words he might have spoken. He wanted to explain, maybe even lie, but nothing came out. Instead, his hand instinctively reached for his phone, awkwardly fumbling to pull it from his pocket. Liam noticed this, remaining calm and composed, as if he had been expecting this moment. Before Daniel could even register what was happening, Liam was already beside him, closing the distance in 2 quick strides. With a sudden sharp motion, Liam knocked the phone out of Daniel's hand, sending it crashing onto the pavement. The sound of shattering glass pierced the stillness of the night as the screen broke into pieces. "Think you're clever, do you?" Liam muttered, his voice low but laced with unmistakable menace. "You got involved with my wife? Thought I wouldn't find out?" Daniel took a nervous step back, but Liam was already upon him, moving with unnerving speed. In one fluid motion, he slammed Daniel against the nearest wall, his fingers gripping Daniel's collar with crushing force. Daniel gasped for breath, his breathing now rapid and ragged, eyes wide with panic. "I didn't know," Daniel stammered, his voice faltering. "Don't lie," Liam growled, tightening his grip and leaning in closer. "I saw everything. Texts, letters. Don't even try to deny it." Daniel's eyes darted around, desperately searching for an escape, but there was none. It wasn't Liam's rage that was terrifying, but his precision. This wasn't blind fury, it was a meticulously planned encounter. Every second felt rehearsed. "Did you really think you could just walk away?" Liam's voice was now barely more than a whisper, his face inches from Daniel's. "Without consequences? Without paying the price?" Daniel squirmed under Liam's grip, his voice trembling as he begged. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean for it to go this far." Liam's lips curled into a grim, joyless smile. Too late for apologies. Suddenly he released Daniel, but before he could react, Liam's fist drove into his stomach with brutal force. The blow knocked the wind out of Daniel, and he doubled over, gasping for air. Liam wasn't done. He grabbed Daniel by the throat and slammed him into the wall again, this time even harder. Daniel groaned, weakly raising his hands in a futile attempt to defend himself, but it was useless. Liam was in total control, every movement deliberate and merciless. Another punch landed squarely on Daniel's face, sending him crumpling to the ground. "You took everything from me," Liam snarled, standing over him. "You thought you could just walk away as if nothing happened." Daniel, now on all fours, coughed and wheezed, struggling to stay conscious. He tried to crawl away, but Liam wasn't finished. He grabbed Daniel's shirt, yanked him up, and threw him against the wall once more. "Please," Daniel rasped, his voice barely audible. You didn't think," Liam interrupted, his tone icy and devoid of emotion. "You didn't think I'd find out. You didn't think there'd be consequences." And now they had arrived. Daniel, beaten and broken, slumped against the wall. His body barely held itself upright, and his eyes, filled with fear and desperation, stared at Liam. Liam crouched beside him, his voice low but chillingly calm. "Tonight, you leave town. If I ever see you again—" He left the sentence unfinished, but Daniel understood perfectly. He weakly nodded, his breathing shallow and uneven, his body trembling with fear. Rising to his feet, Liam casually brushed off his hands, as if the whole scene had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. He cast one last glance at Daniel, his expression unreadable. "That was your warning," he said quietly. "Next time, you won't be so lucky." Without another word, Liam turned and walked away, leaving Daniel crumpled in the darkness, broken and defeated. It was well past midnight when Emma's phone softly buzzed on the nightstand. She stirred, still clinging to the remnants of sleep, and absent-mindedly reached for her phone. She assumed it was just a usual message from Daniel, confirming his safe return home, and didn't even check who was calling. "Hello," she mumbled, her voice heavy with drowsiness. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before a measured, serious voice spoke. "Mrs. Smith?" Emma's eyes flew open at the alarming tone, her body tensing instantly. Sleep was now a distant memory. "Yes, this is Emma," she replied, her voice sharp with sudden wakefulness. The voice continued, calm but with undeniable urgency. "I'm calling from the hospital. You need to come to the emergency room immediately. There's been an incident." Emma's heart clenched, her pulse drowning out all sound. "Is it Liam?" she asked, struggling to keep the panic from her voice. For a moment, she grasped at the hope that maybe it was Liam. Maybe he had done something reckless, driven by the tension between them. Perhaps this could be her way out of the suffocating marriage, a chance for salvation. A pause lingered on the other end of the line, and then the voice responded. "No, it's Daniel. He's been seriously injured. You need to come right away." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. "Daniel?" she echoed, barely audible. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, and fear rose from the pit of her stomach. "What happened?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling. The person on the phone remained composed, but she could hear the weight of the situation in his tone. "His injuries are severe, Mrs. Smith. The doctors are doing everything they can. Please come as soon as possible." Emma's thoughts spiraled into chaos. What had happened? Could Liam have been involved? The thought was too horrible to dwell on for long. Wasting no time, she threw off the blanket and scrambled to get dressed, her fingers trembling as she fumbled with the buttons. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur. She barely remembered getting behind the wheel or speeding through the empty streets. Her sole focus was Daniel. Images of him flashed before her eyes, his smile, how he had reignited a spark in her she thought was lost forever. and now he was lying on the brink of life and death. By the time she screeched to a halt in the hospital parking lot, her mind was filled with fear and unanswered questions. She rushed through the sliding doors, her breath shallow as she approached the reception desk. "I'm here for Daniel," she mumbled, momentarily forgetting his last name in her panic. The nurse at the desk nodded with understanding, her expression serious. "Room 210, third floor. The doctors are still with him, but you can go in." Without hesitation, Emma hurried to the elevator, her heart pounding as the cold hospital air enveloped her. She reached Daniel's room and hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. She took a deep breath and then pushed the door open. What she saw was worse than her worst fears. Daniel lay motionless on the hospital bed, his face barely recognizable beneath the bruises and bandages. Machines and tubes surrounded him, the rhythmic beeping and hissing creating a grim atmosphere. His eyes were swollen shut, his head wrapped in a blood-stained bandage. The strong, vibrant man she once knew was now broken, barely resembling himself under the thin hospital blanket. A wave of nausea rose in Emma's stomach, her knees weak as she staggered to the chair beside his bed. Collapsing into the chair, she stared at the battered figure in front of her, her mind struggling to comprehend the reality. "Oh God," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "What did they do to you?" But Daniel didn't answer. He lay there, silent, unreachable. He was out of reach, either consumed by pain or lost in the fog of sedatives dulling his mind. Emma's eyes blurred with tears she held back as she gently took his hand, her coldness making her shiver. The door creaked, and a doctor entered the room, casting her a fleeting glance before focusing on the chart at the foot of Daniel's bed. His face was shadowed with the exhaustion that comes from too many losses. "Mrs. Smith?" the doctor asked softly. Emma barely nodded, her throat too tight to speak. With a heavy sigh, he closed the chart and looked at her with a blend of sympathy and professionalism. "He's stable for now, but the injuries are severe. We're doing everything we can, but the recovery will be long, if he even survives." The world around her spun as the doctor's words sank in. Emma had anticipated conflict, even aggression from Liam toward Daniel, but nothing like this. This was beyond her imagination. "Who did this?" she whispered, though in her heart, she already knew the answer. The doctor met her gaze with a grim expression. "The police are investigating. As far as we know, he was brutally attacked. I hope that when he wakes up, he'll be able to tell us more, if he can speak." The doctor's words barely registered as she drowned in a whirlpool of guilt, fear, and confusion. She sat in silence, her eyes fixed on Daniel's fragile body, the minutes slipping by unnoticed. Finally, with trembling legs, she stood and left the hospital. The night air stung her skin as she got into the car, but she was too stunned to feel it. Her mind raced in chaos, trying to piece together how things could have spiraled so far. Liam had found Daniel. But how? And what exactly had he done to him? When she returned home, she was greeted by the emptiness of the house, a thick and oppressive silence. She tossed her keys on the kitchen counter and wandered aimlessly to the table, her thoughts still swirling. Then she noticed it, a single sheet of paper lying conspicuously on the table. Her heart clenched as she approached it, her hands trembling as she picked it up. The note was short, the words scrawled in Liam's familiar handwriting. "Cheater, this is only the beginning." Emma's legs gave out, and she collapsed into a chair, the paper shaking in her hands. Liam was gone. His half of the closet was empty, the shoes that had once been neatly lined up were missing. His clothes were gone from the drawers, and the familiar scent of his cologne had vanished from the air. Their joint bank accounts had been drained. All of Emma's expensive jewelry had disappeared, and any trace of Liam's presence had been carefully erased, leaving behind only the spiteful message. Its venomous content echoed in her mind every time she closed her eyes. She sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the now useless checkbook. She had called the bank, tried to track the withdrawals, but Liam had covered his tracks too well. He wasn't coming back. The money was gone, the savings depleted, and there was nothing left to salvage her ruined life. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt lifeless, mirroring her own isolation. The days blurred together as Emma struggled with the wreckage of her life. She rarely left the house, ignoring calls from worried friends and family. Patricia had stopped by several times, concerned, but Emma couldn't bring herself to face her. It felt like everything she had built, everything she had been, had crumbled to dust. In the rare moments when she did leave the house, it was only to visit Daniel in the hospital, but even that had become unbearably painful. Though his condition had stabilized, the damage was irreversible. Daniel, the man who had once filled her life with passion and excitement, now lay broken, both physically and spiritually. One afternoon, Emma stood at the door of his hospital room, hesitating. She hadn't seen him since the night Liam had attacked him. She could still hear the nurse's words echoing in her head when she had first asked about his condition. "He's recovering," they had told her, "but slowly. The injuries were serious. The road ahead is uncertain." Steeling herself, Emma knocked softly on the door, unsure if he would even want to see her. Daniel's eyes lifted from the bed, cold and distant. "What are you doing here?" His voice was hoarse, a faint echo of the man she had once loved. Emma cautiously took a step forward, unsure of what words could possibly bridge the chasm between them. "Daniel, I never wanted it to turn out this way. I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice fragile. He responded with a sharp, bitter laugh, which quickly twisted into a grimace of pain. "Didn't want this? What did you think, Emma? How did you expect it to end? You danced too close to the fire and now we're both burning." His words cut through her, and though her eyes filled with tears, she held them back, trying to maintain her composure. "I didn't know Liam would go this far. I couldn't have predicted—" "Enough," Daniel interrupted, his voice cold, devoid of any trace of forgiveness. "I don't want to hear your excuses, and I certainly don't want your pathetic sympathy." Every word dripped with venom, and the anger in his voice grew with each breath. "Because of you, I've lost everything. My career, my reputation, my future. Do you really think your sorry can fix any of this?" His words hit her like a slap, each sentence carrying the full weight of betrayal and fury. Emma stepped back, feeling the full force of his contempt. "Daniel, please, she began, but he cut her off again, his tone final and unyielding. "Leave." His voice was firm, his cold gaze locking with hers, leaving no room for argument. "I don't want to see you anymore, Emma. It's over." For a moment, she froze, paralyzed by the inevitability of his words. Slowly, the reality sank in. There was nothing left to say. She turned and left. The soft click of the door behind her echoed like thunder in her chest. It was all over. Daniel was gone, just like Liam. And now, she was utterly, irrevocably alone. Meanwhile, in a distant city, far from Emma's shattered world, Liam was enjoying his new reality. He had taken everything from her, her savings, her jewelry, even the last remnants of her pride, and used it to start a new life. The man who had once been trapped in a monotonous marriage had shed his old life, using her stolen assets for his own rebirth. The quiet husband who used to stay late at work and overlook the world around him had vanished. Now, Liam was free. He settled into a simple, unassuming apartment, not luxurious, but enough to start anew without drawing attention. Liam wasn't interested in flaunting his newfound wealth. What mattered to him was the satisfaction of having walked away clean. He kept a low profile, easily blending into his new surroundings. Finding a job wasn't difficult, nothing grand, but enough to pay the bills and, more importantly, stay under the radar. Sometimes when he was in the mood, Liam would send Emma cruel reminders of his existence. A postcard from a random town, a cryptic message from an untraceable phone. The first postcard arrived just 10 days after his disappearance, A simple card, no return address, with 3 words written in his familiar handwriting. "Miss me yet?" When Emma saw it for the first time, rage overwhelmed her, and she nearly tore the postcard to pieces. But she knew there was nothing she could do. Liam was out there somewhere, living free, while she was left behind, buried under the consequences of her choices. The postcards kept coming at random intervals, each one more mocking than the last. Some arrived blank, with only the faintest trace of ink. Others contained unsettling, cryptic messages like, "How's Daniel?" or "Still thinking of me?" Each postcard was a new wound, a reminder that he was watching her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. Emma's life became an endless cycle of isolation and regret. She tried returning to work, but the whispers and glances followed her everywhere. People knew. They knew about the affair, Daniel's downfall, and the mysterious disappearance of Liam, leaving only chaos in his wake. She felt their judgment in every passing look, heard it in every hushed conversation that fell silent when she entered the room. There was no escape from the consequences of her choices. Friends gradually drifted away, conversations with family grew colder, and Daniel, he had made it clear that he wanted nothing more to do with her. Her world had collapsed, and there was nothing left to rebuild it. Emma found herself alone, tormented by memories of a marriage that had withered long before Liam disappeared from her life. Despite the loneliness, the guilt, and the scattered postcards he left behind, a small part of her soul still clung to a faint hope that maybe Liam would return. But deep down, she knew it was just a fantasy. He was gone for good. That realization hit her on a grim day when a knock on the door shattered the silence of her home. She wasn't expecting visitors. Over time, friends had drifted away, and she had distanced herself from the few who remained. When she opened the door, a man in a flawless suit stood before her, holding a thick folder. "Emma Smith?" His voice was curt, professional. She nodded cautiously. "Yes, that's me." Without further words, he handed her an envelope, turned, and left. Confused, Emma went back inside and with trembling hands tore open the envelope. Her eyes fell on the bold heading, "Divorce Petition." A heavy despair settled over her. She had known this day would come. Liam had left months ago, leaving her life in ruins. But seeing it in writing was a brutal confirmation. The finality was unbearable. She sank into the nearest chair, her gaze blurring as she stared at the legal documents. She had no money to contest the divorce, no means to hire a lawyer. But even if she could, what would be the point? There was nothing left to fight for. The house was being sold off to cover debts. Her savings were depleted. She was drowning in bills. Emma had been ignoring the mounting wave of expenses, clinging to the tiny hope that something, anything, might change. But nothing had changed. Now, Liam was severing the last fragile thread that connected them. Days blurred into one another as Emma drifted through the wreckage of her hopes. She performed her daily routines, brewing coffee, cleaning, browsing job listings, but it all felt meaningless. She felt empty, moving through life without purpose. The romance that had once brought her joy now seemed like a cruel joke. Daniel was gone, Liam was gone, and she was left alone, facing the ruins of her life. One evening, sitting in the kitchen, she once again stared at the divorce papers, as if their weight could change something. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The number was unfamiliar, but a strange impulse made her answer. "Hello?" she said in a flat voice. "Emma." The voice was unmistakable. "Liam." Her grip on the phone tightened. "Liam," she said, her heart racing. "What do you want?" she asked, a trace of irritation in her voice. There was a long pause before he finally responded. "I just wanted to make sure you got the papers." Emma swallowed, her throat dry. "I got them," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Is this really what you want? She asked, her voice trembling with desperation. A soft laugh came from the other end of the line, sending a chill down her spine. It's already done, Emma. You should be glad I even care. After everything you did, you're lucky I'm not leaving you with less. His words hit her like a blow, but she knew better than to argue. He had already taken everything, her money, her home, her dignity. All that remained was the crushing weight of guilt and regret. Why? She asked, her voice shaking. Why are you doing this? You've already destroyed everything. Another pause. When Liam spoke again, his voice was calm, distant. Because I want you to remember. I want you to wake up every day knowing this is your fault. You made your choice, and now you'll have to live with it. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, but she blinked them away quickly, determined not to let him see her weakness. You didn't have to destroy everything for me, Emma said, her voice barely audible. Laughing, Liam replied, his laughter turning colder and sharper. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided you could lie to me. Divorce? That's just the final touch. Now you're free. Isn't that what you wanted? His words pierced her, and though she remained silent, she couldn't deny the truth hidden behind them. In some twisted way, she had wanted this. An escape, a spark, something to break the monotonous routine that had slowly overtaken their lives. But now, the reality of her actions weighed heavily on her. She had thrown away everything she had, and in the end, she was left with nothing. Goodbye, Emma, Liam said, his voice emotionless and distant. Enjoy your freedom. And with that, he hung up. The following months dragged on endlessly, and the divorce went through without resistance. Emma signed the papers, watching as the last remnants of her marriage crumbled to dust. She was officially free, but this freedom felt empty, meaningless. Liam's presence still hung over her like a dark cloud, suffocating her thoughts every day. And Daniel? He had disappeared without a trace. He had long been discharged from the hospital, but he had completely vanished from her life. Their affair had become public knowledge, destroying any hope of salvaging what remained of their lives. Daniel's world fell apart, just like hers, and it was clear he had no intention of rebuilding the shattered pieces with her. Meanwhile, Liam moved on, rebuilding his life far from the ruins he had left behind. He barely thought of Emma, except for the occasional postcard or message, a subtle reminder that he hadn't forgotten her. His revenge wasn't just about draining her finances, destroying her reputation, or ending their marriage. The real punishment was the knowledge that Emma would never escape her own choices. Her past would follow her like a shadow, impossible to shake off. Every time she looked at herself, she would see a woman who had sacrificed everything for a fleeting desire, a woman whose life was now marked by regret and endless sorrow. Liam was free, his revenge was complete. And Emma, she would never truly be free from him. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.